What's up, First Case? My name's Hank Balch. I'll be hosting your 2025 SPD Quality Improvement Expert Series, and we've got two fantastic experts on this topic queued up for you over the next 12 months. We're going to be diving into topics like, hey, what is the purpose of SPD in general? What are the KPIs that you need to be looking at if you're talking about quality? How do you collaborate up and down and around surgical services to make sure that SPD can do everything that they need to do to keep your patients safe? We're going to introduce our experts here on this episode one. That we're going to dive into the why is sterile processing such a challenge in 2025? Greg, would you mind introducing yourself? I know you're the VP of Service Lines at SpecialtyCare. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Hank. So my name is Greg.agoston, and as I mentioned, I am the Vice President for Service Line Sales within SpecialtyCare. SpecialtyCare is a broad organization offering services and perfusion, intraoperative neuromonitoring, and specifically to this call or to this meeting is sterile processing. So Marcy.konja, who's also online with us here, and I pretty much head up and manage that part of our business. Background, 30 plus years experience. Most of that has been around, obviously, sterile processing with the manufacturers.
Okay, yeah, great to have you on the series. Yeah, Marcy, what's your story?
So my name is Marcy Konja, and I have been with SpecialtyCare for a number of years, but my background is all clinical, and that's why Greg and I make such a good tag team together. I have over 30 years of experience in sterile processing, starting out as a tech at a large hospital, and then actually running that department after a while. When I left there to try to stay home and have children or stay with my children, I ended up getting a call from an off-site reprocessing facility, and I was the director there for a while, and SpecialtyCare bought it. And my background, what I do now is consulting and review of sterile processing departments.
Wonderful. Well, like I said in the intro, I know we're talking to some big hitters here in this quality improvement space. So I'm excited to learn a thing or two along the way, as well as the audience. So let's just start at the beginning, Greg. Sterile processing, no surprise, it's a challenge around the U.S. today. How did we get here?
Yeah, so great question. And a lot of my background is in, on the business side of the equation. As Marcy said, she's the clinical component. I focus on more of the operations and quality side. I'm Lean Six Sigma certified through the University of Michigan and done a lot of work around this area. And what I came to find out was that, when you look back, Lean is all about finding root causes of the problem. So I went back and looked at really kind of what was the root cause, or how did we get here, as your question was stated. So what I found out by looking at some very good books, some old books, Principles of Methods of Sterilization, written back in the 30s and 40s, outlined what was happening at the time. And at the time, American College of Surgeons came back and said, hey, we really want to centralize sterile processing. And the reason being was that sterilization at the time was in a situation where the most difficult thing was managing the sterilizer. They were really, pressure cookers. So these pieces of equipment were scattered throughout the hospital, and nurses were actually doing all the instrument processing at the time. Because there was no control over that, the American College of Surgeons thought it would be best to centralize that function into a central sterile processing area, which they did. The challenge, though, and where we've kind of gone off the rails a little bit, is that at the time, the sterilizer was very difficult to manage. You had to manage the time, the temperature, the pressure, and actually monitor those units to make sure that all the parameters were hit. So that took somebody who had some skill to be able to manage that piece of equipment. The instrumentation being processed at the time was very basic. So if you think about ring-handled instruments, they list in the book and show a picture of like the most common, instruments or the challenging instruments to process. Literally it's, scissor, a rongeur, curettes, a scalpel. So very, very, what we would consider very basic general instrumentation. Now and then the other key thing was at the time, they thought if they took a competent nurse, someone who was trained with the sterilizers, the autoclaves, and put them in charge of the departments, you could bring people over from like food services or outside the department, non-technical people, to do the washing and cleaning of the instruments as long as they were under good supervision. And at the time, that probably worked pretty well because the instrumentation was pretty simple. Fast forward to today, the challenge today is that the sterilization, the autoclaves, the low temperature sterilizers are very simple to operate. They're push button, they're automated. They give you a tape, tell you what parameters were met. You check those off, and you're generally pretty good to go. Plus all the other chemical, biological indicators that we have today. So pretty well set on that. What has changed though is the complexity of and amount of instrumentation. So that's where things have gone off the rails. Where you can't really take someone who's a non-technical person or a very untrained person and put them in charge of processing this very complex instrumentation. It just doesn't work very well. It generally takes, from Nancy Chobin's article back in 2008, she wrote an article about cost and time to train a technician for SPD. That was estimated between 9 to 12 months, and the cost at that time was around, I think, $51,000 or $52,000 for the training. And extrapolate that to today's numbers, we're now into the probably mid 60s to train a person for that same amount of time based off her data. So it's a lengthy process, and it's a very complex process to get somebody up to speed. And then you compound that problem with the high turnover in SPD, and you create kind of the situation we see a lot of places across the country.
Yeah, Marcy, when we talk to administrators, they don't like to hear that 9 to 12 months training figure. It tends to be how quickly can you get these folks trained from point A to point B? And then, when you whip out the data that says, hey, to Greg's point, this industry has gotten more and more complex, and the requirements, that knowledge base, that core training base to really be competent at this, it just takes time to affect. Has that been your experience in the industry? Do you want to add any other kind of clinical perspective to what Gregg has said here today?
Oh, yes, of course, Hank. 9 to 12 months to feel comfortable. I remember when I started being scared when that phone rang from the OR, because I didn't know if I would know what the instrument was. There's so many more instruments nowadays, and the complexity is there's so much detail in the IFUs for cleaning, inspection, sterilization. There's different cycles, different parameters, different ways to sterilize, but cleaning and inspecting is so difficult now. And we have so many tools that are available for our resources that we need to involve all of those. It's very difficult to bring. It's very nice to bring in somebody, promote them from within, from food service, from EVS, but you have to have a comprehensive orientation plan and education plan for them, and taking them through each area, all of the instrumentation, having them learn specifics about each instrument, on how to clean it, what the use is in the OR too. I always believe that if they know and understand what this item is used for, in it, what a grasper does, or what this type of scissor is cutting, that you understand and can inspect it better. And that's one of the things that our goal is: AFS, available, functional, and safe. And making sure that the instruments are available when needed, that they're functional, that they're all in working order, they're safe, they've been sterilized correctly, there's no bioburden, there's no problems within the tray. And that's what's needed nowadays.
Hey, I'm just going to pull up, if I could, show you a quick picture. This is the example of what they were saying was the most challenging instruments to process.
Yeah, right. And everyone's in there thinking like, oh man, that's that's the least challenging instruments these days.
We weren't doing flexible, endoscopies. We didn't have minimally invasive surgical instruments. We couldn't perform a lot of the procedures that are being performed today just because the technology wasn't there. I mean, we weren't doing robotics. We weren't doing flexible endoscopes. So we have come so far in the advancement of the medical instrumentation, but what's been left out in from the sterile processing line is that thought process is you can bring in, lower skill level people, less technical people to do this processing because we're washing, we're just cleaning, spoon, forks, and knife. No longer works today, and it hasn't worked for many, many years. And what Marcy and I see, and I'm sure that, people are listening to this experience on a day-to-day basis, is the result of that is that if we don't treat the profession as a true profession and train people properly at a very high level, and then, keep them and retain them in those positions through, advancement, through opportunities, through pay, recognition, motivation, then you end up with this high turnover in this department that's critical to the success of the operating room. And from that, it results in high errors. And errors are shown up as, missing, broken, dirty, contaminated trays, etc. And we literally work in hospitals where, and there was a whole other topic that we're going to get into is, in a later session, is error reporting. And that really brings about, like, a lot of times we see the iceberg as just being this little piece of ice that's above the water. Below that, the air levels are actually much higher, but we find the operating room just kind of covers and gets through the day and solves the problem by getting another tray, another fuel pack, etc. But it causes real delays, real frustrations, and it endangers patients on a regular basis on the operating rooms across the country. So we see this as really as a national issue that is really needs to be brought to light, where we need to really uplift the role of sterile processing and the personnel and sterile processing across the country.
Well, Greg, Marcy, terrific introduction to a very large challenge and a very complex challenge, as you've both alluded to. But the good news is we've got 12 months to dig into various aspects of that. You alluded to one of the topics, error reporting and prevention, we're going to cover. But actually, in the next episode, we're going to dive into describing and defining what this quality piece is, right? Is that an objective standard? How do we measure that? So if you're hooked already, good news, we'll be back next month with these same two experts in our 2025 Sterile Processing Quality Improvement Expert Series. But until then, we'll see you around the First Case channel. We'll be right back with the next episode.